Welcome to our special coverage of the crisis between Ukraine and Russia and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Here are the headlines. High-level talks between Ukraine and Russia take place at the Ukraine-Belarus border. As the Russian offensive enters its fifth day, major cities remain under attack from Russian forces. Plus, the Russian ruble plunged to a record low today. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Let's go straight into the program. Talks between Russian and Ukrainian officials are ongoing in the Belarusian city of Gomel, 5 days after Russia invaded Ukraine, the biggest assault on a European state since World War II. While the talks bring tentative hope for an end to the war, Ukraine's president made it clear before the discussion began that he was not expecting any major breakthrough. And even as the meeting takes place, there are reports of intensified Russian shelling in eastern Ukrainian cities. According to the Ukrainian president's office, the aim of the talks is an immediate ceasefire and the withdrawal of Russian forces. Russia has been guarded about the talks, with the Kremlin declining to comment on Moscow's aim. It's not clear whether any progress could be achieved after President Vladimir Putin put Russia's nuclear-armed units on high alert on Sunday. But the talks are being held on the border with strong Russian ally Belarus, which has become a launchpad for the invading Russian troops. As the talks go ahead, major cities including Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Chernihiv remain under attack from Russian forces. A government official says dozens of civilians have been killed in Kharkiv as shelling continued into the morning today. The UN also says more than 500,000 people have fled their homes to escape the war in Ukraine as heavy fighting continues across the country. Let's take a quick look at the major events over the past 24 hours.
Cities across Ukraine remain on high alert on the fifth day of Russia's invasion as ceasefire talks begin in Belarus. Ukraine's military said that Russian troops had made repeated attempts to storm the outskirts of the capital Kyiv overnight, but had failed to capture it. Kyiv has lifted its curfew after 2 days, with some food shops open and public transport running, but people are still advised to shelter and not go outside unless necessary. The major cities of Kharkiv and Chernihiv were also targeted overnight. Fighting also continues in the strategically important port city of Mariupol in the south, on the Sea of Azov near Russia-annexed Crimea. But Ukraine's military claims the pace of Russia's assault has slowed and that Moscow has suffered heavy losses. Russia's defense ministry, however, claims that it's taken full control of Europe's largest nuclear power plant in the south of Ukraine. Ukraine has denied the report. On Sunday, President Vladimir Putin put Russia's nuclear deterrent on high alert, further raising the stakes amid his military assault on Ukraine. The UK's Defence Secretary says Russia could indiscriminately bomb cities as frustration with the campaign grows.
I think by entering this into the conversation yesterday, he did two things. He reminded everyone he's got nuclear weapons, which, as you say, starts to set off people being worried. But secondly, he distracted from what's going wrong in Ukraine. You know, we're all talking about it. We're not, he is clearly wanting to get people's attention distracted from what is going on the ground. And he's had that, to some extent, he's successfully had it. This is the overwhelming scale of the Russian Federation army up against Ukraine. They are behind schedule, they are taking significant casualties, and they are feeling public rejection in parts of the Russian system itself. We've seen many protests. But the Russian handbook is to then get more violent and commit more forces, because fundamentally in the Russian sort of doctrine, the lives of their own soldiers matter much less than in other armed forces. So we have to brace ourselves for what may come next, which could be ruthless, indiscriminate bombing of cities and the propelling forward of soldiers and high casualty levels. And that's going to be horrific.
Ukraine's health ministry says civilian death toll now stands at 352 people, including 14 children. Over 400,000 Ukrainian civilians have fled the country into neighboring Poland and Romania. The Russian invasion came after months of denials by Moscow that it planned to attack. President Vladimir Putin has called the attack a special operation. Western nations responded to the onslaught with an unprecedented array of sanctions on Russia's economy. During early trading today, the Russian currency plunged nearly 30% to an all-time low against the dollar. The EU on Sunday also shot all Russian planes out of its airspace.
VOA's Heather Murdoch joins us now from Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital city. Heather, we do hope you're safe and well.
Thank you.
So another day of Russia's attempts to take over Kyiv, but the Ukrainian military says the Russian forces have slowed. Is that your assessment of the situation on the ground? Are the attacks on the capital reducing?
Certainly in the past couple of days, the amount of attacks on the capital has reduced. Have they been slowed by the Ukrainian military pushing them back, or are they just slowed in as they wait for peace talks to continue? That we don't know, and that truly cannot be known until later on. We've heard from some patriotic people here in the city of Kyiv that the Ukrainian military is keeping them back. So that I think is giving hope to the people here in the center of the city who are worried about the Russian forces moving in.
I know you've been locked in because of the curfew in Kyiv over the weekend, and now it's been lifted. Why are they lifting the curfew, and how are residents reacting to this? Are they eager to get back on the streets? So what's available out there?
Today, when they lifted the curfew at 8 a.m., a lot of people did go out in the streets, including us, and it seemed like most of the movement we saw in the streets were people trying to go to the train station or find a bus or a car to leave Kyiv, and many are trying to actually leave the country as well. There were some shops open. There were long queues at the few shops that were open. One of the issues that we're having here in Kyiv is that the cash machines don't really work, and most stores that usually take cards, and this is a country where people use credit cards for everything, are not taking cards for the most part. So we would go to some grocery stores, try to buy some stuff, and some people were there, but they didn't want to buy anything because they're wondering, are we going to run out of food or are we going to run out of money first? Other than those things like necessities trying to leave, we didn't really see a lot of people in the streets. People who had nothing that they needed immediately stayed home.
So we're hearing reports that major exits from Kyiv have been blocked, possibly by Russian forces. Those people who are trying to leave, how exactly are they going? Because I also understand that there is a shortage of fuel. Many filling stations are closed.
Yes, there's a lot of chaos here on this exact question. A lot of people want to leave, and no one is sure exactly how to leave, which way is safe to go, what's going to happen when we get there. There's also the issue of if you are to get a bus or a train, which is what people are trying to do, and are for most part being provided free of charge, when you get to the destination of that bus or train, are you going to be among hundreds of thousands of people clamoring to get out of the country? Or is there going to be a food or a place to sleep? Is there going to be fuel to even get you to that destination, or is even the roads going to be open as you try to leave the city? So all of these are questions. I do know people who have gotten out, people who are trying to get out right now, and people who are trying to go tomorrow. So in the coming days, we'll see how many of those routes worked out. We do know that there are a tremendous amount of people at the borders, in some places days-long waits to even try to get across. So a lot of people are getting to the borders, and a lot of people are getting across. But as this drags out, more people are going, and the crunch at the borders is getting larger.
And what a terrible thing to be moving, considering present weather conditions. I know you're freezing cold where you are. You're just outside. And I'm wondering, how people are trying to keep warm, as they try to move about and look for safety.
I think people here in the city of Kyiv are mostly like ourselves, just feeling grateful. It's cold here. It is quite cold, but it is not as cold or snowing as in other parts of the country. I don't know what's going to happen in the coming days in terms of health of the people of Ukraine, as so many of them are on the move, potentially outside. And we've heard the really bad weather is coming and the snow is coming. It's already snowing in some places. So for now, in the city, we're here okay in the cold weather, but we're really worried about what's going to happen to all the people who are leaving and to everyone here if things get worse.
Indeed. And now let's talk about the ceasefire talks that are going on near the Belarusian capital. Are you hearing the latest from that? It seems to be pretty difficult knowing what's going on, even though the Ukrainian president says he has no expectations from the meeting.
From here, from the streets of Kyiv, we don't really know what exactly is going on behind closed doors with those peace talks. But what I can tell you is there's kind of a dual thought process on this. People are hopeful. I mean, because they have to be hopeful. Everyone, if you're here, you have to think there has to be a way out of this that does not include more violence and bombing of this beautiful city. At the same time, the two countries seem to be so at odds, with Russia invading what has been an independent country for more than 30 years, and also the Russians feeling threatened by the very presence of this country and its relationship to the West. So how are they going to, in one day, make an agreement to stop all of this violence after months and months of failed negotiations? It has led a lot of people to feel like it might not work.
And I know that the fear factor has been raised up a notch with President Vladimir Putin announcing on Sunday that he had put nuclear deterrent on high alert. How is Ukraine preparing for this? Has the president mentioned this? And, it's just regular people trying to ward off Russian troops and Russian forces in Ukraine. How are they reacting to this?
I mean, this is a really terrifying prospect, but I think people think it's too ridiculous to be realistic for it to happen. Of course, everyone thought that about the initial invasion, so we're not sure at this point. Yeah.
And the president remains defiant. Heather, he's rejected an offer from the United States to evacuate him from the capital. How has this helped in boosting the morale of the Ukrainian people? How confident are they that he can lead them out of this crisis alive, at least?
The people of Ukraine are very confident in their military and are also very proud of their military. We've heard people talk about their military with tears in their eyes, and civilians gathering weapons, and including homemade weapons that people are building in basements and in their houses. In terms of the leadership, there is a mixed feelings about whether or not it's the leadership of Ukraine that is going to save this country. But there's certainly a strong feeling that it is the military and the young men and women serving in the military that could possibly do so. There is a lot of fear as well, though, because if you think about what this military is facing, a giant superpower like Russia, it's an overwhelming thought that these two militaries would actually be able to face off to each other.
Well, Heather, thanks a lot for updating us. We'll let you get that hot cup of cocoa right now so you can get warm. Thank you for speaking with us, and do stay safe in Kyiv.
Thank you. You too.
Viewers, Heather Murdoch giving us an update. Also joining us now is Miller from a town near Vinnytsia, which has also been hit by Russian missiles, causing people to flee. Now, for her safety, she's asked that we do not reveal her surname nor her exact location. Miller, thank you for joining us on the program. How are you doing today?
Hello. Every day we don't know what to expect. We are in shock, in panic, in big stress. And we don't know how our lives will go tomorrow. How our parents will stay safe, all our people and friends. So I don't know how to say. I really pray for something good, but the situation is not stabilized. It's going worse and worse, and that Russia threatened us with a nuclear bomb, and we are really very, very afraid of this because it will destroy everything.
And you have seen parts of the war already. You did see those Russian missiles flying and hitting some neighboring buildings around where you were before you fled. How did that make you feel? I mean, what did you do when all of that was happening around you?
Yes, I was at the time in Kyiv, and I was absolutely shocked. I didn't know what to do. because we couldn't believe in that. We like started like straight after that. We took our like luggage, all things which we need like for the first time, and start to run away. But the problem is that all gasoline stations around the city, in the city inside, are absolutely empty. And you know this feeling like you are stuck and blocked in the city. Like, but we found the way we like get out from the city, and the people in the Vinnytsia region hosted us like family which we didn't see like before, and not only me and my husband here, also like another people from different regions are also hosted in this like family. It's like 4 children here and 10 other people from the different regions, and we like here right now thanks for this family. It's really scary, you know. I heard a lot about war, but when you feel it, it's like wordless. You don't know what to do, where to go, how to escape, what to do, because like Ukraine is very big country. Your relatives, parents are in different locations, and you want to do something like to save them, to save your life. And it's just like feeling which I have never heard and not never feel. And I even don't know how to explain it. It's really scary.
And I can imagine. I mean, watching from here, we're seeing, pictures of, some of the devastation caused by those missiles. And then, I understand, the fear that also comes with the Russian president making that announcement. And another, your situation is also a bit peculiar because you're not only with your husband, you're also with your parents. So you have to also think of their safety. How is it? I mean, how are you planning this exit for you and your family? And how difficult has it been?
They are currently in Zhytomyr region, and Zhytomyr region it's close to the Belarus border. And all the times that see from the Belarus border, a lot of missiles attack their like main cities, and not only main cities but military bases as well. And for example, yesterday, just 30 kilometers from them, missiles from Belarus destroyed the airport at Zhytomyr. So, and like a lot of my classmates, because it's my native town, were also escaped from that city because attacks was very often, and this is very scary. This is dangerous. So currently they are safe, they are all, they are like sheltered, but I'm really worried about the like food supply, because currently we're disconnected from like refill of gasoline, refill of food. And it's the same like in Kiev, and roads they are blocked, and we are also like afraid marauders, and also Russian troops, they shooting civil people, and it's very like dangerous to move somewhere. I really want to connect with them, but currently it's impossible and unsafe.
Understandably.
But just one moment, like
Go on, Mila.
my parents, they are living in Sumy region, and Sumy region absolutely disconnected from Ukraine, and they are occupied by Russian troops. At all, really, like not possible to get there anyway.
Really, really sorry to hear that, Mila. Our thoughts are with you. Do keep us updated on your movements, and do stay safe. We understand you're in a shelter, you're with friends right now, and you're all listening and making plans just in case things change. Do let us know how it goes. We'll keep in touch.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for support.
We'll have more after the break when we come back on our coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine as the country asks to urgently join the European Union. Join us again. Welcome back. You're watching our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It's day 5. Now, the Russian president has called the West an empire of lies following the imposition of sweeping sanctions against Moscow. He was discussing the economy with top officials in the Kremlin today. In retaliation to the sanctions, the president has closed its airspace, Russia's airspace that is, to airlines from 36 countries, including all 27 members of the European Union. Some of the banned countries have already been identified, while others have been named by the Aviation Authority, Rosaviatsa, for the first time today. Flight bans are expected to hurt airlines that fly over the world's biggest country to get from Europe to Asia. They're likely to force them to find new routes. Rosaviatsa says the flight from those countries could, in exceptional circumstances, be authorized if they secure special clearance from Russia's Aviation Authority or Foreign Ministry. Well, speaking of those sanctions the West has imposed on Russia, the Biden administration in the U.S. has announced additional sanctions against Russia's central bank, effectively prohibiting Americans from doing any business with the bank. It's also frozen its assets within the United States. The new measures will also target the National Wealth Fund of the Russian Federation and the Ministry of Finance of the Russian Federation. The U.S. is also adding Kirill Dmitriev, another ally of President Vladimir Putin, to the sanctions list, as well as the Direct Investment Fund Dmitriev heads. The Russian Direct Investment Fund, or RDIF, is officially a sovereign wealth fund, but is widely considered a slush fund for President Putin. Officials said the U.S. expects its allies to take similar steps in the coming days. The UK has. We'll tell you all about it a bit later. Because our Washington correspondent, Maria Bird, with more. Maria, more sanctions for Russia, and President Vladimir Putin is hurt by them. Clearly, from that meeting he had this morning with his top officials when he was discussing the economy, has the Biden administration begun to see the impacts, though, of the other sanctions imposed on Russia and Putin's allies?
One of the real challenges I think that was known from the onset of the sanctions, even those from last week, was that it could potentially take a long time to see the real impacts of those. There have been slight things seen as a result of the impacts, as you mentioned, blocking some of the banks and so some of the banking activities, not allowing, obviously, some of the funds to go back and forth between Russia and the U.S. But that is a very small percentage of, I think, what the expected sanctions are set to do. And so we probably will be seeing that in the next weeks to come, really the true impact. And obviously, this is going to impact the U.S. economy, which we saw some of that last week. But as you mentioned in meetings earlier today, we're trying to really look at what are some of the things the U.S. could do to try to curb some of the impact as it relates to trade and obviously the economic structures here in the U.S. That could impact the U.S. as a result of some of the blocking of banking with Russia.
Yeah, and speaking of banking, the U.S. and some other countries have also, isolated Russia from the SWIFT group, and that's because of what's going on in Ukraine. And I know that I think over the weekend, a lot of people in Russia found it difficult to have access to funds as a result of that. So maybe those sanctions are really beginning to kick in, but not as widespread as you say. But there were more attacks over the weekend, Maria. More people had to flee for safety. We've seen the pictures, trying to get to the nearest borders, either Poland, Romania, Czech, Slovakia. Is the Biden administration thinking humanitarian aid for Ukrainians? Will they be willing to also receive refugees?
The U.S., we know the U.S. has typically been a country that has opened the doors to refugees. The greatest challenge right now is that we even have many Americans that are still stuck in Ukraine or not able to get out and get to safely get back here to the U.S. So I think what they're really going to do, I think the first step is going to be some humanitarian aid, trying to stabilize the areas, trying to make sure that those bordering countries do have the access and the ability to take in those from Ukraine who are refugees, and obviously many others from other parts of the world who are stuck in Ukraine at this time. So that is going to be the first order of business. Now, once we get to a place where people can safely leave and the U.S. is able to come in and potentially board planes, as we've seen them do in years past when other countries to come to the U.S., that will definitely be on the table. And I think at this time, just trying to stabilize and trying to see what can be done to try to decrease the impacts of Russia's invasion and to see if there's any end to sight of this occurrence at this time.
Now, stabilizing the region is going to be a challenge. President Putin regards any more actions by the EU and the West as a provocation, even to do more. We heard, that warning, he giving that order for the nuclear to be the nuclear stuff to be kept on alert, the order for them to be on high alert. So the U.S. has condemned that. But what is America willing to put on the line in case this goes on and in case it spreads to neighboring countries?
The U.S. has stated that they were not looking to bring troops in, but I think that is something that is potentially unavoidable depending on how far this actually goes. I think that you'll begin to see if we're still in next week with the same conversation or even in worse conditions and they're not able to stabilize and provide humanitarian aid. We will begin to see military actions from the U.S. and probably partners, obviously, with the EU and other NATO partners, allies, to ensure that they can go in potentially to assist with the situation. We know that Ukraine has been very strong in their response and has been able to respond to Russia. But as you stated before, Putin is saying that he's looking to move forward with even greater measures. And so that potentially could put the U.S. in a position where they really have no choice, because we know that, as you said before, some of these sanctions, how many are they really able to impact, and how much is that really going to impact Russia? We know the U.S. has many elite here from Russia that obviously this is impacting, but it's not going to potentially, we're not seeing where it is ending the conflict.
I know that the UK has also announced sanctions, as well as just shortly after the US announced sanctions on Russia's central bank. So is the government considering the impact of this, not just on the Russian economy, but on the United States as well? Because there are people in Russia who do business in the US, and there are also Americans who do business in Russia.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is definitely being considered. And I think, as you mentioned, the talks earlier this morning, that is what is at the top of the conversation. How do we ensure that those individuals who are doing business, how do we revert some of that? How do we not have the great impact that I think Russia is expecting this to have on the U.S. and not only on Russia? So we'll probably begin to see some more information in the coming weeks. But again, it's not I think the real issue now is how do we end the conflict? And I think the number one focus for President Biden and his administration is the people of Ukraine and ensuring that they are able to stay independent.
Maria, thanks for joining us. We know that there will be more as we await, the results, the communique at the end of the talks near Belarus. Thank you again for bringing us up to speed on U.S. policies concerning Ukraine. So the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, has called for immediate admission of Ukraine into the EU. He wants the EU to admit Ukraine as a member of the economic bloc. He made the call in a video address saying, "Our goal is to be together with all Europeans, and most importantly, to be on an equal footing. I'm sure it's fair. I'm sure it's possible." Dozens of people have been killed during missile attacks, fighting in the streets near Ukraine's major cities in recent days. Hundreds more have fled the war-torn country, while others have joined military resistance efforts and taken up arms against Russian forces. Several EU member nations and allies in the West, like the United States, have pledged support for Ukraine and condemned Russia's invasion. But the EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, says that though Ukraine had a European perspective, EU membership could take years, and practical help, including defensive weapons, is more useful now in the short term.
Total is not in the agenda, believe me. We have to do for more practical things. Membership is something that will late, in any case, a lot of years. We have to provide an answer for the coming hours, not for the coming years, the coming hours.
Ukraine and Russia. We have meeting dialogue. What you can say?
That's the first step. Ukraine has clearly an European perspective, but now we have to fight against an aggression. And the world cannot afford that a powerful country smashes the neighbor using its military capacities. If we allow to it, it's the law of the jungle. It's the law of the stronger. I am stronger than you, and I kill you. I impose you my law. It's the law of the jungle, and this, for us Europeans, is an existential threat. I will do everything we can in order to stop it.
Well, Britain's Minister of State, Lord Ahmed, says Russia is increasingly isolated, but sanctions might be tightened further, particularly through the SWIFT international payment system to inflict pain on Russian banks for its invasion.
And we are working on that. We're very much on the lead on this. I'm pleased that there are certain banks which have already been identified and action has been taken. And we will continue to work with our international partners to ensure that, again, a very clear message is given to Russia that there is a major cost economically for Russian institutions, Russian banks, that this invasion is going to be costly to them. I think there's so much about that. So I'm on whether
Our London correspondent, Juliana Olanka, is here with us. Juliana, great to see you. And I know you have been monitoring the British government's response to the invasion in Russia. Now, apart from the sanctions, what else is Britain doing to show its dismay and its condemnation of, the invasion by Russia into Ukraine?
Good afternoon, Amarachi. Well, it's been a busy day in the Palace of Westminster. As we are talking, the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, is outlining some of these renewed sanctions that have been imposed upon Russia. We were told a couple of hours ago that Prime Minister Boris Johnson will also be heading to Poland and Estonia for a couple of days to try and broker some sort of peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. Over the weekend, Boris Johnson was out and about with the Ukrainian community here in London. There's reportedly about 70,000 Ukrainians that are living in the UK. Of course, most of them are desperately worried about what's happening to their loved ones back home. There has been some level of criticism about the UK's response, particularly on a humanitarian side. And now, just before the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, started addressing MPs, Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, outlined what the UK would be doing in terms of taking in refugees from Ukraine. And according to her, 100,000 Ukrainians will be able to access the UK for about a year. That was met with swift criticism because I think there was some hopes that perhaps the UK government would replicate what we saw from the EU over the weekend. They've, of course, opened their doors. They are going to be taking the brunt of the 400,000 people that have already fled from Ukraine. But what they are going to be doing is allowing people to stay within the EU for 3 years. The UK haven't done that. We know that Boris Johnson's government not really keen to have an open door policy, of course, including even in war. So lots of people are not happy with that. One of the items that Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, was talking about is an extra £40 million worth of aid that will be sent. I believe over the weekend when Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, was speaking to Ukrainian community members, he spoke about also sending more ammunition. And of course, we know that Zelensky and those on the firing line want that. But a lot of people are concerned about that, Amarachi, because we do know that a lot of these firearms that get into Europe do end up on the African continent. So there is mixed feelings, mixed reactions at the moment. But I think according to the latest poll that I read, 77% of people living in the UK do want the British government to do more. So it does seem as if Ukrainian support is firmly in place in these shores.
Yeah, it does. It does bring flashbacks, doesn't it, of the European migrations back in 2015, when many Africans and people from the Middle East made their way to Europe, and the UK really wasn't open to receiving refugees at the time. So, understandably, the criticism against the UK government. But 70,000 Ukrainians already in the UK. Some of them are out on the streets already protesting. And are they also considering, how much of an impact this will be on the UK economy and how prepared countries are to bear the brunt of, the weight of the economic burden, that hosting these refugees carry?
It's a good question and very, very important. I think Boris Johnson just a couple of hours ago did say that particularly when it comes to the sanctions, we separate those two parts at the moment, the humanitarian situation, but the sanctions that have been imposed upon Russia, particularly the removal of Russian financial institutions from this SWIFT payment platform, which is home to about 11,000 banks and financial institutions across the world. It is having a ripple effect on global markets, particularly, of course, markets in Europe. They were all trading very firmly in the red. We know that Russia is considered a commodities warehouse for Europe. It is the link between the rest and the West, if that's a good way to put it. The cost of living crisis, which we have discussed quite extensively on Channels TV, is really affecting people in the UK. And we're already seeing that prices are beginning to rise. I think it's really difficult to try and ascertain how the UK people, citizens feel about this, because as you can imagine, Amarachi, the media is wall-to-wall war. We're not really getting an opportunity to speak to people about how they are going to feel, considering they have a national insurance tax coming up in a couple of months. They also have rising energy bills coming up. Inflation is currently running at 5.4%. Wages are not growing. And now this is going to be increased substantially because of this war in the Ukraine. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, did say it is going to hit British people hard. And I think that's the reason why there was a little bit of hesitancy before the weekend by some governments, particularly governments in southern Europe, about pushing too hard on Putin, because they know it will affect them, because the entire plumbing system is all integrated and now it's all coming apart. There are concerns. So yes, it is. It's not great, but there are people on the streets, and we are going to be out actually in London over the next couple of days, Amarachi, speaking to Ukrainians who are protesting at the Ukrainian embassy in Trafalgar Square in central London. And of course, we will be sharing that footage with our colleagues in Lagos.
Just wondering, Juliana, the relationship that the UK has with the EU at this time. Britain is out of the European Union, so not a lot of coordination with, EU position on Ukraine at this point. How difficult or how easy has that been so far?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and one that I think it is beginning to show the cracks. But I think the way the West has been tackling this war with the Kremlin, or the Putin, as you say, is it seems to be more G7 led, NATO led, and of course that removes the EU in some aspect. I think Britain in particular has been highlighted as an individual entity in this row, and that's because there is so much, not my words, everybody else's, dirty Russian money floating around in the UK more than in any other country in the world. I think Germany as well have a very key stake in this war. But I think Britain is acting as its own state, as it should be. Again, we know that Prime Minister Boris Johnson will be in Europe tomorrow. I believe in probably half an hour or so, there is going to be a meeting between G7 nations, including Jens Stoltenberg of NATO and others. And so they are working in coordination, but there are some countries that have a stronger stake than others, and Britain is one of them, and they are going full speed ahead. It's just as to whether or not these measures that have been put in place are enough to stop Putin, and only time will tell, Amarachi.
Yeah, I chuckled there when you said the Prime Minister will be in Europe, as if UK is not in Europe. Juliana, thanks again.
Thank you.
We'll take a break now on our coverage. When we come back, Nigerians stranded in Ukraine continue calls for help and evacuations from the war-stricken nation. Stay with us. You're watching Channels Television's coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte has called on the Netherlands and its allies to put a stop to Russia's invasion of Ukraine during a debate in Parliament. Today, the country's military supplied defensive weapons to shore up Ukrainian resistance. The Dutch military released video footage of pallets marked rockets being loaded onto a transport aircraft over the weekend. On Saturday, the Netherlands said it would supply the Ukrainian army with 200 Stinger air defense rockets and 50 Panzer Faust 3 anti-tank weapons with 400 rockets at their request. The Kremlin has accused the European Union of acting in a hostile fashion towards it over arms supplies to Ukraine. Russia's government warns that supplying weapons to Ukraine is dangerous and destabilizing as Russia continues to advance on the country. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov declined to elaborate on President Vladimir Putin's decision on a special regime for nuclear forces or the number of casualties the Russian forces have suffered. President Putin has ordered that Russia's nuclear deterrent forces be put on high alert, saying aggressive statements by NATO leaders and economic sanctions against Moscow were behind the decision. Let's talk more on the security analysis of Chidi Nwonu is in London for us. Chidi, great to see you. What do you make of President Putin's announcement, the order he gave to put nuclear deterrent forces on high alert? You think he is going to engage nuclear weapons in this war?
Well, good evening, and thank you for having me. I don't think there is a risk of nuclear weapons being deployed. This is all part of the deception and information warfare environments that surrounded this conflict. As you would have observed, the build-up to this conflict had a huge amount of information being pumped out into the airwaves about the Ukrainians being neo-Nazis, genocidists, and this being about NATO trying to put bases in Ukraine and all of that kind of stuff. This is all part of that. The Russians have suffered more difficulties than they expected, and they need to, kind of distract people, put something out there that would change the game a little bit. However, at the same time, we'll have to consider that the actual full-blown invasion of Ukraine was what everybody would say was the worst-case scenario from the Russian side as well as from the Ukrainian side. And the fact that Putin has gone ahead and done it does mean that you have to step back a little bit and consider what his words mean. But I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about nuclear weapons use.
Well, he does seem to have a plan that he is carrying on despite, the international condemnation. And then how risky do you think this is? He had given a warning when he started off this invasion, given a warning about interference by other countries. But here they are sending weapons and military aid to surrounding countries and also sending to Ukraine. Isn't that considered interference?
Well, yes. So there are several problems here, and one has to look at this in a much wider context, in that Russia was very objected to several things that the Western powers did. The first was the intervention in Serbia and, and Kosovo becoming an independent country. Russia was greatly opposed to this because, Serbs are their traditional allies, Slavic people, Orthodox Christians, and they considered that, you're breaking up a sovereign state. The West did it anyway. The Russians were opposed to the invasion of Iraq. Western powers did it anyway. So, and also you add to that Libya, Western powers, overthrew the Gaddafi regime, and Russia was opposed to that. However, Russia was never able to actually actively support any of these regimes. So from President Putin's point of view, the fact that the Western powers, be it the US and EU countries, are actively sending weapons to Ukraine is an insult, adding insult to injury. That's why he's trying to deter with these, threats of, retaliation and nuclear weapons and all of this kind of stuff. The thing is, unfortunately for Russia, they've already played most of their strong hands. Their strongest hand was their hybrid warfare ability, which everyone has seen on display both in the UK and in the Balkans and in the rest of Europe, and everyone's ready for it. The other strongest hand was their conventional military. Their conventional military right now is being held up by the Ukrainians, who are much weaker than the Russians. So there's not much more he can threaten other than, as he did earlier, nuclear weapons or maybe cyber attacks. So it's a threat that, again, you don't discount, but it's just something that you've got to put into the mix and not necessarily take it as a course of action.
Yeah, it's not all the time that the Russian president actually reveals his hand in a conflict, or even before a conflict starts, and his next move as well. So much propaganda going on from the Russian side, and I know we're still waiting for the outcome of that meeting at the Belarusian border between Russian representatives as well as the Ukrainian representatives. The Ukrainian president says he has very low expectations coming from that meeting. But yesterday, President Vladimir Putin, when asked the question about what it is people do not understand about what he's doing in Ukraine, he did mention that there's been a lot of violation of treaties by NATO and by the West. And right now, he's really not interested, in the talks and the conversations holding. He's more interested in the outcome, and that Russia is going to do what Russia wants to do.
Yes. So in terms of the talks, nothing will come of the talks because there's nothing to talk about. So the only thing the Ukrainians want is for the Russians to withdraw. The Russians will ask the Ukrainians to recognize the separation of Donbass, which they won't agree, Luhansk and Crimea, and also, to the removal of Zelensky and his government. These are unacceptable to every party. So for both sides, and again, this is the fascinating thing, is that the Ukrainians and the Russians, not just are they culturally similar people, also the way of warfare is similar, as they both grew out of the old Soviet army. So tactically, in the old, Soviet kind of doctrine, negotiations such as this are part of warfare. You use negotiations to buy time. You have ceasefires so you can buy time, bring up your logistics, reset yourselves. So both sides understand the game that's being played, and both sides understand that they've got to pretend to be talking and, see what they can do. But in reality, everybody understands that there is going to have to be a fight. And the big fight is most likely going to be the fight for Kiev or for Kharkiv. And that's going to be what determines the next stage. And the problem we have is that for President Putin to take Ukraine quickly and with minimum kind of casualties, he's going to have to, use a lot of force. He's going to have to use a lot of artillery, a lot of air power, and level cities. Now, that obviously is going to be deeply unpopular in Russia as well as around the world, and it's also going to be very costly in terms of his men. So he has a lot of problems to deal with, and since he's unable to decapitate the Ukrainian regime, the Ukrainian government, take out their government and demoralize them, they've shown good spirit and they're all fighting back. It's going to be a long, hard, brutal war, and a lot more people are going to die, unfortunately.
We're hoping it's not as you say. If that's a prediction, we're hoping that does not come to pass. Chidi, thank you for speaking with us.
Have a good day.
Go in groups, make sure your passport is with you. The federal government is doing everything to make sure that Nigerians, especially students, are protected at this time. The words of the chairman of the Nigerians and Diaspora Commission, Mrs. Abike Dabiri-Erewa, speaking to Channels Television in Abuja. She explains that representatives of the Nigerian mission in Poland and the Nigerians and Diaspora Organization Poland are waiting to receive Nigerians who make it to any of the 4 borders. She adds that the phone numbers of the contact persons are also listed on NIDCOM website.
There are 8 borders, but we're recommending 4. So when you get to these 4 borders, you're going to meet Nigerian officials there from the embassy, from the Nigerian Diaspora Organization, and there are phone numbers to call. There are mails to also send messages to, And then there's a form to also fill, even before you get there, so that they know what you want. If you get to Poland and you want to return, they know what to do. If you get to Poland and you want to stay there for a while, they know what to do. So the Nigerian embassy in Poland, as well as the Nigerian diaspora community, have actually been on the ground to try to help stranded Nigerians there. Initially, there were bottlenecks, but not anymore. And then the idea, again, is better you go by train, but it's a long waiting hour. Some wait for as long as 20 hours, 19 hours. So those trains take you directly to these borders, particularly these 4 that the Nigerian mission is recommending. And then, like I said, go in groups. Make sure your documentation is with you, have your passport with you, and the most important thing is that there are numbers to call, there are people to help out, there are buses to convey you and cars to convey you when you do arrive, and there's a place of convergence. So all the details are out there. It's on our website. It's with you, and the federal government is doing everything to ensure that our students in particular are protected.
And just to let you know, Channels Television is keeping in touch with those students we have spoken to recently who are trying to cross the border. A number of them have made it across and are safe. Thanks for watching this hour of our coverage. We continue to monitor the situation in Ukraine. We'll bring you updates as soon as we get them. I'm Amarachi Ubayi. Bye for now.